So, consciousness, the core of human experience, is knowledge, acquiring new information. That generally is considered science, or has been, like fire, things, Creativity and passion for science is dead now. Why would that be? Well, I can give you one reason: because no one wants to be a lab monkey and fill out spreadsheets all day. That's one. The 19th, and early, 20th and early 19th century, that was a renaissance of science, kind of. A lot of things were figured out then, and now we're at the wall. Assimilating knowledge, and learning is basically creativity and visualization. If you're thinking of new things and you're trying to come up with a new idea, a new scientific theory, you're trying to imagine it behind your eyes. What would it be? What is it? What does it look like? Before you could see it through a microscope even. You're still doing that. Einstein sat in a dark room, and he would imagine what it would be like to be in the cockpit of a photon and what everything else around you would look like. And that's how he came up with the theory of relativity, through visualization. Imagination is generally thought of as a muscle, right? Maybe there's something to that, okay? Now, imagination and the placebo effect is generally thought to be able to affect your whole consciousness. Visualization techniques are used very widely in psychology to treat depression, and they're used for memory techniques, remembering things. Visualization is part of the core of human experience too, like visualizing things behind your eyes when you go to bed, remembering your dreams. What is behind your eyes? What's going on here when you're falling asleep? Well, what you see behind your eyes is called a phosphene. They're originally thought to be due to like thermal activation or heat activation. Some fun patterns, right? Some trippy patterns, right? Because that's where psychedelics comes from. It comes from like the crazy, visualization pattern. You press on your eyes and you get these crazy colors and patterns, and that's through activation of photoreceptors behind your eyes in your retina. Now, these photoreceptors have the ability to reprogram your whole consciousness. Consciousness is basically based on visual, things, walking around and seeing new things and then learning about them and maybe dying or not, depending on your situation. Don't eat the berry, maybe eat the berry. Anyway, that's that. So, what's a good useless thing? A good thing that's become a meme for the general uselessness of education and learning in society and the lack of creativity in that. Well, mitochondria. What I learned in school. I am an effing piece of shit. Yes, I used the F and then the S word. Yeah. Everybody else is also an effing piece of shit. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. What are taxes and how do I pay them? Worry not. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Let's see. Guard, get in your cell. Me, you can't make me. You don't run the cell. Guard rips off his mask to reveal mitochondria. Actually, I do. Yeah, it's just kind of some meme portrayed for the general uselessness of the information taught in the education system. But what if mitochondria, I'm just going to take it to the next level and just try and make that, the thing that's become a meme, into the thing, okay? So mitochondria, right, it's responsible for just about every part of cellular metabolism. It generates and creates ATP. Just about every ounce, every energy that's spent in your body is spent through ATP. You go through like your whole body weight of ATP in a day, spending energy. So mitochondria does that. It also metabolizes, in your cell, things that aren't so good for it. And how it does that is it breaks apart the part of the molecule that's catabolic, is reactive, generally has oxygen in it, and those are called reactive oxygen species. And mitochondrial ROS are created when the mitochondria, for example, kind of anthropomorphizing here a little bit, but they basically break off that mean part of the molecule, the part that wants to hurt you, and locks the mean part away in a molecule that can be broken down later. But when it does that, when it breaks it apart into that reactive oxygen species, it releases a photon. And they can come in several wavelengths, right? Lots of them. And generally, actually, those photons come in these ones. And why that's interesting is because retinal dark noise, the stuff you see behind your eyes, the stuff that is the birthplace of creativity and imagination and thought, is from mitochondrial reactive oxygen species metabolism. They release photons, they hit the back of your eyes, you're literally watching your metabolism behind your eyes. The metabolism in some cells in your retina, but nonetheless you're watching the metabolism, and henceforth the photons released from that. That was generally thought to be due to thermal activation originally. It's kind of widely misunderstood. Now, here we go, March 2016, they think that's due to mitochondrial ultra-weak photon emission. Why is that cool? Well, because you're literally watching your metabolism. Okay, so what are the implications of watching your metabolism? Well, I'm just going to give you a little experiment here, a little voodoo. So you're watching your metabolism behind your eyes, right? And it creates a thought. And that thought creates another visualization behind your eyes. And it's kind of this weird positive feedback loop, this mirror after mirror, the crazy trippiness. No, but kind of, in a way. You're creating, you're getting a visual from your own metabolism. You're creating a thought from your metabolism, which affects your metabolism. That creates another thought. Visual things can create epigenetic changes, phobias, methylation of DNA. Which is kind of neat. But how could that happen? Well, interestingly enough, it's through something called an intrinsically photoreceptive retinal ganglion cell. Maybe. That's what they say. That's what they think, and that is a mouthful. What is that? Well, it's a type of photoreceptor. It's a third one. Yeah, it was discovered in the 80s. And it acts as a sort of flux, and it really only detects one wavelength of light. What is a flux? It's like radiation per area per time, So what it does by basically sensing that one wavelength of light, which happens to be roughly 480 nanometers right here. What it does by detecting that wavelength of light is basically tell you whether it's day or nighttime. Before we had all this electrical light, we were ran by the sun, right? As hard as that is to believe. And the sun went up and it went down around regular times a day, and so we had a very regular metabolism. And this one frequency of light has been proven to affect everything from sex drive to metabolic rates and much more. Neurostructural changes, lots of things. For example, Alzheimer's, people with Alzheimer's, these cells don't really function at all. They don't function much at all. Blind sight is interesting. Let's say you weren't born blind, but you go blind, you still react to paper thrown at you or something. They did tests with a wad of paper, and the people reacted. They had muscle reaction, so they could still see it, but the rods and cones weren't reacting. They think it's this one too. Interesting. So muscle memory. Why is that neat? Well, that is the type of cell that can reprogram your body. What does that mean? Well, let's take a look at this rad dude named Wim Hof. But before we watch this video, I'm just going to preface this. There was a study done in the 80s by Harvard in Tibet. They worked with some monks, and what they witnessed when they were there was these monks drying off wet sheets atop mountains with nothing but just thought. They were just thinking so hard that they dried off these sheets, and they measured the temperatures in their toes, and they were able to increase the temperatures in their fingers and toes by up to 17 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty crazy. They did that through something called gamma brainwave state. But that sounds pretty familiar to what you're going to see, right? So these monks literally put wet sheets over their body, dried it off. And now we're going to watch Wim Hof. So just think of that when we're watching that. Think of that gamma brainwave state.
What's special about Wim is that he kind of has this mind over body control that's pretty phenomenal. When he is exposed to the cold, his body just physically reacts differently from a lot of other people.
Right now,
The skin
holding
temperature
a
doesn't change.
26
It stays the
Guinness
same.
World
His
Record,
internal
and
temperature
all
does not drop below
related to
98.5.
extreme cold. My records range from staying in the ice for 1 hour 53 minutes in direct contact with the
was
ice,
on Stanley's
running
Superhumans.
fastest half
He was.
marathon barefoot, climbing Kilimanjaro in record time in
He made it up
shorts,
Everest too, not all the way.
swimming underneath
He made
the
it to,
ice
like, I forget
for
which camp.
longest distance.
This guy's insane.
Women's
He does it all.
a very
Eat a
special
candy bar,
person.
doesn't matter.
He has an
Boots
aura
and
to
some
him that
shorts.
is very positive energy, but what you can see when he begins to breathe, he has the ability
Breathing.
to focus his mind and body together in a higher function than most can do.
I
Body
created a
and mind
method.
in a higher
The
function.
components are breathing,
Breathing,
mindset,
mindset,
and cold exposure. Gradual, non-forced
Mindset.
cold exposure.
What is mindset? And how do you connect your body and mindset? Well, we found that that connection kind of lies somewhere in the gamma brainwave state. What is that? It's like a whole function together as one. Let's take a look at a little metaphor.
And the metaphor that's useful is when you have an orchestra that's warming up, and you've got the brass section, the woodwind and the percussion and all that sort of stuff, and they're warming up, it sounds terrible. But when the conductor comes on and gets this little wand, little conducting stick sort of thing, and taps it, then all of a sudden the orchestra all comes together, and then the conductor leads that orchestra and creates this beautiful symphony. And that's very much like the brain, very much like the gamma state. So when you activate the gamma state, the rest of the brain sort of falls into sync, literally, and then from there, you can tell your brain, your body, anything. You can reprogram at that deepest level. Because more of your brain...
You're going to open your
is firing at the
chakras.
same time.
No,
Your
please
mind,
No. No, this is science. Speaking of science, gamma state. Let's leave these. Let's go to the gamma state. And the function as a whole. What did he mention? What was that mentioned in the Wim Hof video? They said that you need to focus on mindset. How do you control your mindset? He focuses on closed eye breathing, right, and breathing techniques and keeping it the same. So when you're closing your eyes, you're seeing that retinal dark noise, that ultra-weak photon emission. And that is affecting your state. Possibly a little more than people may think. So let's say that there is a frequency of photon, somewhere around 480 nanometers, or exactly, released by cellular metabolism. What about that one photon allows these guys to do that with their body? Are they changing the frequency of photons emitted already? Maybe. Are they producing more of these photons by altering, more or less of these photons by altering their metabolism through breathing? Either way, they are able to affect their metabolism by meditating. These same monks that were studied with the gamma brainwave state were able to put their mindset in a place where their metabolism would be basically, they might as well have been sprinting on a hot day, and they're burning all their calories while not moving anything but their eyes behind their eyelids. And then they go directly, not even minutes later, to basically sleeping, super slow heart rate metabolism. And they're doing that through visualization. And there's that spooky positive feedback loop. But what are they doing to those photons? Are they creating more of them or less of them? Or are they altering? Ooh, spooky quantum mechanics. The moment or frequency of a photon. Like I said, imagination is widely considered to be a muscle. So there you go. If the studies suggesting that alertness and cognitive function are influenced by the non-visual system hold true in larger studies, this would suggest that the health of the eye may influence mental health and function in ways previously unappreciated. Russell and Van Gelder, 2008. Now remember, this stuff I just talked to you about is 16 and 17. There's papers published in 17 that are just moving on this stuff. It's really interesting. It would almost act as a sort of quantum system, a sort of placebo effect system, you know, mental feedback loop system, cellular memory system. Cells have a memory, and that memory has to be stored somewhere, and it's used over and over again. That's how they recall these same metabolic states, is through some sort of cellular memory and connecting to it. So how are they connecting to the cellular memory? Is that how they're able to produce more of these photons? Or less of these photons, or alter these photons? I don't know. But they're able to do that somehow. And I would say it's through those same photoreceptive cells I mentioned earlier. And mitochondria. And ultra-weak photon emission. What is cool about mitochondria? Well, they are more closely related to a bacterial genome than our own, and they're passed down only through matriarchal lineage, or your mothers. Where did mitochondria evolve from? I think it's like Rickettsia felis. Rickettsia felis. Yeah. So we think that they're most closely related to these that we know of now. They're a type of magnetotactic bacteria. What does that mean? It means basically that these type of bacteria use chains of magnetite to navigate geomagnetic wavelengths, orient themselves like up or down, how deep am I in the ground type of thing, based on photon moment, or basically how the atmosphere affected the photon before it hits it, so it can kind of orient itself. So a chain of magnetite. So there is some bacteria squirming around, and then there is a single-celled organism, and they have little organelles, and these organelles do little things, and they metabolize little things, and they do things. And those organelles were basically created through endosymbiosis, basically eating other organisms and using them. So that thing eats. Let's say that thing eats this thing, this Rickettsia felis thing. This chain of, it's basically a chain of magnetite. Basically, I mean, like by weight. So what does a chain of magnetite do? It's basically encapsulated in this biological material. Magnetite, what's neat about it, is it's the only naturally magnetic mineral on Earth. These chains of magnetite in animals in this bacteria orient themselves on a 1-1-1 axis. I'm a mineralogist, trust me. Now, what that does when you orient it on that axis is a maximized magnetic moment. We talked about photonic moment a second ago. But what magnetic moment is just like sensitivity to those photons. So it increases sensitivity by angling itself and building on a chain that weird way. And that, like, these photons hit this biological film that I mentioned earlier, these incoming photons from the sun, right? When they hit this film flexes because it's diamagnetic. So diamagnetism is basically the ability to produce an equal but opposite magnetic field. Biological material is diamagnetic. That's why all this electronic stuff doesn't hurt me, is because it produces a magnetic field away from it, and it doesn't affect me. It might a little bit, it does, you know. But that's how we have a defense against it, is carbon and hydrogen molecules. The strongest diamagnetic materials we can create are like polycarbonates. The strongest natural element, I think, is bismuth. You can like do your own levitating thing by like bismuth, and I don't know, you can do that though. Okay, back to magnetite and mitochondria. So that's where mitochondria comes from, is this magnetic thing. Okay, so this single-celled organism eats basically this chain of magnetite. In that bacteria, it probably doesn't live long, but that chain of magnetite stays. And what that does is keep relaying geomagnetic information to that single-celled organism. And not only does it know where it is geomagnetically now, but all those little organelles popping off doing things are releasing photons too. And so that single-celled organism kind of not only now has a way to navigate, in a way, you know, if it ever learned to do that. I don't know, who knows which single-celled organism that was, the first one that we all evolved from with spines or something, I don't know. But it eats it, gets geomagnetic information, and it's also getting information relayed back right, to it from its organelles. So it kind of understands its own cellular metabolism better, and it thrives, and that's why it survived through evolution, just because it ate this thing that was basically a chain of magnetite. What does magnetite do in animals now, and are there chains of them? Yeah, because we evolved from this thing, so we have chains of magnetite in it. Magnetite's in just about every living mammal. It is in every living mammal. Birds, fish. Fish use it to navigate, like salmon spawning. Birds use chains of magnetite and a photosensitive protein called cryptochrome to navigate magnetic ley lines. And actually, interestingly enough, where's this thing? Oh. They use melanopsin, which is the photosensitive protein that's sensitive to that blue light, 480 nanometers low. They use that combined with those same intrinsically photoreceptive retinal ganglion cells to navigate horizontality. Okay, so they're navigating with that using magnetite. I'm not going to go into whether or not we can sense magnetic fields. That is not for me to say or not. But what if this magnetite is a form of memory storage for that same cellular memory I'm talking about? What if they can actually, through meditation and creating or focusing on that same state of mind, get that magnetite spinning to that same, or at least stimulate the same electrical frequency in their brain to get that magnetite spinning? Because electrical frequency is just photons passing by, and as those photons pass by, through those dendrites and axons, they're still emitting, the electrons are passing through, they're still emitting photons just from that excess energy. Like some of that is still emitted in photons. And those photons are still hitting the chains of magnetite that are more present in your hippocampus. They're heart, liver, spleen, hippocampus, amygdala. I think I hit them. But that's like basically where they are most found, the highest density parts per million. But yeah, so the magnetite, those photons that are emitted as the electron passes through, electrons, electrical signal passes through. And the photons that are emitted are relative to that signal, obviously, in that spot in your brain, and what you ate this morning probably. But they're still relative to it. And maybe by stimulating that same form of thought, or at least practicing and knowing how to get there again through breathing, probably, like they mentioned, maybe that's how they create those photons. That same electrical signal passing through that same spot, and they can just do that again. And so they get that, and that biological film flexes because of those photons, and then the chain of magnetite starts spinning in response to that flexing material, and then the magnetite chain emits packets of photons that could potentially be that same frequency, that 480 nanometer frequency, and that maybe is how they produce more of them. Maybe they could do the exact opposite by the exact opposite. But as a form of memory storage. That's interesting. Now, magnetite and memory. What are some links to that? Well, I'm just going to give you a big one. Alzheimer's disease, right? So Alzheimer's disease, the plaques, the Alzheimer's plaques, the stereotypical ones, are basically most by weight magnetite. And they have no memory left at all, right? Well, at least degrading rapidly. So there's your link to memory. That's a pretty big one. At least cellular memory. Another good link there is the basically melanopsin, retinal ganglion loss, and circadian dysfunction in Alzheimer's disease. Sorry, I'm searching out. But yeah, there's some pretty massive links to cellular and circadian dysfunction. Circadian dysfunction directly relating to metabolic dysfunction. I mean, your whole metabolism is based on day-night cycles and regulating yourself when you eat and when you go to bed. So, let's take a second and recap. Mitochondria behind your eyes while you're falling asleep, giving you retinal dark noise, right? From that retinal dark noise, you're getting images. Those images are affecting your thoughts, which are affecting your metabolism, which are producing more images, which are affecting your thoughts, which is affecting your metabolism, which will produce more images. like when you're nodding off in class, and you have a quick dream, like a daydream. Yeah, maybe that's just your brain decoding your own internal metabolism into something you can interpret, like a dream. Like, I'm unhappy because the ice cream cone was upside down hanging from a tree, and there was a kid riding a bicycle upside, like the most random thing, but that's just your brain maybe interpreting that. So how's that for food for thought? Literally, I guess. Yes, literally food for thought. There you go. Use that for creativity in science. This could provide a whole new way of decoding patterns of thought. If this is a whole new system, cellular memory system, it could be a way to combat several neurodegenerative diseases. There you are. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Took the meme and made it the dream. I shouldn't have said that. I'm out.